If you were in the part one of this, this is part two, but it's also a standalone. Meg Ryan with the League of Cities and Towns, and happy to introduce my two colleagues of Karson, our policy director for the League, and our newest member of our team, Alexa Oldham, who just graduated from the U and started her first day on the legislative session. And she's still with us, so we're very happy about that. We're here to talk to you today about some stuff that may be coming up for the next session, things that will be worked on this summer, busy summer, things have already started, task force, group meetings, everything happening, but also to get some feedback from you. So a dialogue is appreciated. We'll, of course, have some Slido and just kind of trying to talk about some broad topics and see how we can help shape what happens in the next session. Just a quick question, how many of you guys interact with our Friday Facts? Do you know what that is? A couple? So come to us and you can sign up on that. It's every Friday and we list sort of events, what's happening, other groups and other bills or ideas that you need to sort of be aware of. So please reach out to us if we can help you there, because you all are our members and we appreciate you, and the strength of what you do makes us stronger. So thanks. Here's Karson.
Thanks, Meg. Like Meg mentioned, we're going to be kind of providing a high-level overview of what we're seeing so far on the horizon for the 2025 interim and then the next legislative session. Some of the groups, like the Land Use Task Force, the Commission on Housing Affordability, have not met yet. So this is pretty high-level and broad, and we're going to play the guessing game a little bit here. But what we're going to do is kind of just lay out the pieces that we know about so far, how that might shape up in the interim, and then next fall we can come, in the fall we can come back and give you an update, and you can see how wrong we got things. But that's kind of the name of the game here. So I'll just go ahead and jump in here. First, we wanted to just talk about legislative interim committees, which are probably the least interesting legislative committees to watch. But really, this is where a lot of the substantive policy gets made. So have any of you watched legislative interim committees before? I see a couple hands. Okay. I don't blame you. They usually start about 15 minutes to 30 minutes late, and then spend the entire time talking about picking up garbage along the interstate. So, it's they're a lot of fun. And the way this works every year is these committees are a joint meeting of the House and the Senate members, and they're supposed to hash through a lot of the big policy questions so that when we get to the session, everything's been resolved and is all clear and ready to go. That doesn't usually work. Sometimes works, but oftentimes those policy questions are still unresolved. So the reason I want to list these, though, is because a lot of these, we don't have a lot of detail on what these topics actually look like. We know what they are, and the committee can go any number of ways with them. So we went through the whole list and wanted to highlight a couple that could impact planners. And I say could because some of them are very specific to planning. Some of them, they could tangent over to planning, but it all kind of depends. So Economic Development and Workforce Services. This is a committee that's increasingly in the housing and planning space. They want to look at House Concurrent Resolution 14. For those of you who, like most of us, don't really spend a lot of time reading resolutions because they don't typically have the force of law. What this is going to do is this committee is going to go through and talk about the resolution that is trying to streamline all the different state housing policies. The resolution was specific to state housing policies, but alludes to local policies as well. And it was the goal is to say the state is making policies that are going a lot of different directions on housing, whether that's housing funding, whether that's how they interact with local governments, all of the above. So they're trying to streamline them. What does streamline mean? I do not know right now, but we should have a better sense, but recognize that this could be a significant policy change, a policy conversation throughout the interim. Natural resources doesn't typically get as much into the planning space, but you have things like SITLA land disposal. SITLA is the School and Institutional Trust Lands Agency. This could apply to local governments or it might not. SITLA has been increasingly interested in doing housing development, particularly in SITLA properties that are in a municipality or just around adjacent to the borders of a municipality. There's a couple high-profile projects that are already underway in some communities. where the city annexed some Sitla property and they're doing housing there. So this could be unrelated, or this could have a significant impact on the use of public land for housing. Water development has always been a major issue. The state has increasingly been interested in water engineering requirements, so how local governments are sizing pipes, how local governments are pricing water, some of that. We'll see more of that conversation there. Wildfire risk, there's been a lot of conversations around the wildland urban interface planning. Again, we don't know exactly what this will look like, but this will likely get into WUI. And then political subdivisions has a whole bunch of things that affect, they're looking more at county code broadly, but they will look at local government housing policies and specifically trying to get into zoning. So expect a lot of conversations in the political subdivisions interim committee this year. And then public utilities. Who all has heard some conversations about nuclear power this session? Excellent. Yeah, there's probably 6 or 7 bills directly related to nuclear power development, which, while it's not necessarily directly a planning issue, as Meg says, everything comes back to land use. And there's a lot of conversations about how can the state step into planning to help facilitate nuclear power. So whether that's in state land, whether that's an unincorporated county, part of the genesis of Senate Bill 337 last year and the Beehive Development Agency was to facilitate nuclear energy planning. So we expect conversations there. And then transportation. There's a whole bunch on transportation. We saw Senate Bill 195, which we talked about in the last session. I won't rehash that, but a lot of interest from the state on how to better plan for traffic capacity, how to make sure that state transportation investments are matching local land use plans in growth areas. So a lot of conversations on transportation here. So the reason I'm giving you all the lay of the land, I don't expect you to go and start listening to legislative interim committees. It's helpful if you want to, but you can also just follow our policy committee and read our Friday Facts newsletter to get that information. So I'm laying this all out because while this is sort of dry and arcane and most people don't actually attend these committees, this will set the framework for the next legislative session. And you'll see that not all, but many of these topics we'll be reporting on through our policy committee and we'll be engaging on in some level. So just to lay out or to reiterate that everything's on the table, really you see everything on the table with these topics and what the state's talking about. I'm going to kick it over to Alexa to give us an overview of the state housing plan. Has anybody heard of the state housing plan yet? Excellent, more than I thought. So I'll give a little context. So phase 1 wrapped up last December. Phase 1 began last year, and the goal of the state housing plan is to form a more cohesive effort in how we're doing housing policy in the state. Many of you know that every year it seems like there's a moving target. It seems like we're trying to do something different. It seems like we're trying to solve a different problem. The goal is to have a more predictable policy goal. So phase 1, set the goals. Phase 2 is going to be coming up with tactics and approaches to those goals. So I'm going to give it over to Alexa to talk about what we're seeing with the state housing plan.
Awesome. Thanks, Karson. Thanks for having me here today, everyone. If we haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name's Alexa. I know Meg introduced me already, but I started as a policy analyst with the League in January. A major part of my role this interim is coordinating ULCT's participation in the state housing plan. And I have the pleasure of sitting in the 5 work group meetings that occur weekly. So I know you're probably super jealous of me for that, but I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the different work groups, what they're working towards, and then the timeline of the state housing plan. So our first work group is focused on homelessness and deeply affordable housing. That's ranging from that 0 to 30% AMI. The second work group is the step up from work group 1. So that's our subsidized affordable housing, and that ranges all the way from that 30% AMI class to the lower range of market rate housing. Our work group 3 is focused purely on market rate housing opportunities, so that's both rental and ownership opportunities. And we've seen a lot of conversations about deregulation and statewide standards in that group as well. Work group 4 is focused on solutions tailored towards resort and rural communities. And work group 5 is focused on infrastructure and transit needs, as well as thoughtful approaches to planning and housing location and connectivity. So if we want to go to the next slide. Thanks, Karson. All right, so The work groups are currently in the tactic review and prioritization phase. So these tactics range anywhere from incremental changes all the way up to sweeping reforms, and that's including like consolidation of zoning districts and preemption of local control of parking requirements and setbacks. GOPB, who is managing the housing plan process, has done a great job of ensuring that all ideas are out on the table to spark thoughtful discussion between the diverse array of work group members in all of those work groups. There are over 140 tactics on the table right now, and that's not including those tactics that have been introduced by work group members. So we have our work cut out for us before June 18th, which is that due date for the tactic review and prioritization. From there, the work groups are going to spend June 18th to July 16th assigning success metrics to those tactics to help us evaluate the effectiveness of the tactics once they're implemented. From there, the work groups are going to pivot to analyzing existing housing structures and identifying any room for improvement or gaps within those. And the final task of the work groups is to develop an implementation plan for the state housing plan. GOPB will be presenting a progress report to Political Subdivisions Interim Committee in September and a draft plan at the end of November, with that final goal publication date of December 19th. The statutory deadline is December 31st, and that was a part of SB 262, I believe. Oh yeah, you're right, House Bill 37, excuse me, I should know that. And there also are steering and technical committees for the housing plan that are meeting throughout this process to evaluate the products of the working groups. One important thing to note is that it still is pretty undetermined what the final deliverable of the state housing plan is going to look like. The biggest question that we're seeing is how the state housing plan will intersect with MIHP, the Moderate Income Housing Reports. We know that it will affect it in some way, but it's still unclear whether the state housing plan is going to replace the MIHP, whether it will build off of the MIHP, or whether it will exist separately as well. I'll hand it over to Meg from here, and she'll be able to give you some more info on the future of the MIHP. I just want to wrap up by saying that if you are interested in getting involved with ULCT on housing, land use, and planning issues, we have our first Legislative Policy Committee Housing Advisory Subgroup, oh, I got it, coming up. Our first meeting is coming up next Wednesday at 9 a.m. That's a virtual meeting, so you could reach out to myself, Karson, Meg, or any other staffer, and we'll be happy to get that info over to you. Thanks, everyone.
What will those meetings, the LPC, if they sign up, will you give updates over the summer, or how will that work to keep everyone apprised?
Yeah, I don't know. Here, we have a schedule out there for us?
Yeah, so that subgroup that Alexa mentioned will be, it's advising the LPC and it's advising us as league staff. We take our ultimate directions from the Legislative Policy Committee and the Board of Directors, but what we found last year when we had the Commission on Housing Affordability, which had 3 subgroups, all discussing a bunch of different policies. If this all sounds kind of like bureaucratic and time-consuming, it is. But what we're trying really hard to do as league staff is to make sure that we are facilitating a dialogue within our members. We're getting member feedback on as many of the policies discussions that we can, so it's not just us as staff operating kind of blindly, but we want to get as wide a net of feedback as we can to relay that feedback to in this case, the state housing plan. So that LPC subgroup will meet intermittently. We haven't finalized the exact schedule because we're still waiting to hear on the Commission on Housing Affordability meetings. So we still have a couple missing pieces before we put all the puzzle pieces together with our final schedule, but that will be meeting more regularly than the Legislative Policy Committee. The Legislative Policy Committee is an open meeting, so anybody is welcome to attend. We'd love to have you. It's broadcasted on Zoom as well as in person, so you can either come for lunch or you can just watch it remotely. But the Legislative Policy Committee will be hearing probably more updates, and we'll use that subgroup to hash out policy, get more feedback in depth on Slido or in comments, and then we'll take that feedback to the Legislative Policy Committee and the Board of Directors. So if you want to get involved in either of those venues, it would be great to have you and your insights. So yeah, that's a little bit of a mouthful, but that's the structure that we're trying to make to bridge 5 weekly meetings of feedback.
So fast and furious summer. No more barbecues and days at the beach. So this will, but there are ways to get involved. And as always, we got a lot of input from the first round when we asked you this spring, and continue to try to hear as this evolves what your input and thoughts may be. Okay. So, oh, question here. Let me give you this. So we're on Zoom as well. Hello, Zoom.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, when the state housing plan comes out, what is it envisioned to be with respect to cities? I mean, is this just going to be a mandate that we have to do what's in the plan, or?
That is a great question, and it's one we don't have an answer to and probably won't for a little longer. Here's my current view on it. So for the last 6-7 years, let's see, 2019, oh yeah, it's the last 6 years, the moderate income housing plan requirements have really been the interface between state housing policy directives and local implementation. Part of that discussion with Senate Bill 34 back in 2019 was not all policies work for all local governments, and not all local governments are the same, and not all local governments are even starting from the same point or have the capacity to implement the same policies. So that's how we got to the moderate income housing plan requirements, where you all know those, but that's where we came up with a list of strategies and said not everybody can do the same thing, but everybody can do something. And it gave local governments a lot of discretion, but it's also become more onerous by the year. So recognizing that that is that key interface, I don't know exactly what the changes will look like to moderate income housing plans going forward, but I think what we'll see is the state housing plan will set or modify that interface. So the state housing plan, and this could range, like again, as Alexa mentioned, there's no predetermined outcome. It's all been a very open dialogue so far, but I think what we could see, it'll range somewhere between a proposal for specific preemptions, like all cities must do X, to we recommend and provide funding for cities to look at these different strategies. So I think we'll see it somewhere on that spectrum. Obviously, we as local governments want to make sure that you as planners and your elected officials as policymakers have the flexibility you need to do what's best for your communities, but we want to make sure that we have some consistency. So that's the big unknown, and frankly part of the reason for this discussion today. We know that MIHP has been complicated and controversial. But I will also say I think MIHP has a good story to tell overall. I know it's been frustrating with every year there's a bill that changes the requirements. Every year there's a bill that changes the menu. But I also say I think if you look back through a lot of the reports, it's a very long document. And Alyssa might be one of the only ones in this room who's looked through all of them. But like I think they actually do tell a good story of local governments doing hard planning work to facilitate more moderate income housing. And I think that on balance has been successful. But that said, I think this whole effort leads us to the opportunity to revisit that interface. We haven't seen a fundamental change to MIHP really since 2019. And this gives us a chance to have the conversation about whether it's MIHP or, how do we make this interface work better? How do we make sure that you all as planners are empowered to have the predictability to make changes, recommend changes to your elected officials, and know that that's not going to change on you next year? That's the conversation we want to have today.
So how many of you in the room have to submit the report? Okay. And midway, you don't have to yet? Okay. Yep, I'm just... Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, and the rest of you, have you heard of what that is? Do you know moderate income housing plan? Selected cities based on population have to select from a menu in order to implement some housing policies. So it's really on the Wasatch Front, although southern Utah has a few spots. And so I think one of the other discussions has been to, like last year with the subdivisions, we saw that the subdivision update applied to the entire state of Utah. Typically, we try to always look at regulations and see how it applies to small towns and cities of a certain class. This might be another thing. Again, whether it's statewide, whether it's within that same area of basically, Wasatch Front, Utah County. So we're going to dive in, so bear with us a little bit from the folks that don't have to submit this, but be thinking that you may have something that may come across your desk. We can't tell what that is right now. So the questions we kind of wanted to ask, and you know, as Karson had alluded to, there's a lot of hate and shade thrown on the reporting process, but we really want to ask you some positive stuff, knowing what can we contribute in this dialogue over the summer. That what were the positive parts of that? What were the things that could tell your story? That's really what we want, because we want to be able to put those within whatever framework may come, right? We want this to be effective. Does that cover it, sort of?
Yeah, and we have 2 kind of question prompts, and again, we want this to be an open dialogue, not just us talking at you, but we want to know, A, what works within MIHP now? And I know some of you want to just raise your hand and shout nothing, but we'll hold that for later. What we want to know is, and think maybe more like broadly about the framework that has been in place for the last couple of years. We know, we've heard from many of you, like, which things don't work, whether that's the lack of predictability, whether that's feeling like you're doing something really cool and innovative for housing, but it doesn't quite meet the letter of the law on a strategy. So we want to know what is working so that we can say we have a chance to revisit this. How can we improve the system? Is it a, start over from scratch? Is it a, keep some pieces? Like, we want to hear from you where this has been successful, what pieces have worked. So we kind of just want to open it up for discussion and be able to hash through some of these things, because you're all the ones who are actually on the ground implementing this and having to look at plans.
We'll allow one negative comment, and then that's it. Anyone? Come on, take a leap. Thanks.
Alyssa has held my hand through this process to the point that she wants to choke me rather than hold my hand. So I'm with Springfield City, and the one thing, and I don't know necessarily if this is good or bad, but it works for me because I have statutory legs to stand on when I go to my council and my planning commission to say we have to do something, we're required. So you're gonna have to give a little. And with this, and to a certain extent with the community at large. But it's still, it's not perfect. It just gives me some defense. But it's also helped our city to kind of think outside the box a little bit about how things will work, and kind of challenge us to figure stuff out. And so I think that's been good too. And it just brings the conversation. You can't avoid it anymore. So
Yeah.
that's been a good thing too.
So it really brings this issue to the forefront, and yeah, awesome.
I'm Francis from Mill Creek. I actually think that this moderate income housing plan reporting scheme is a lot better than the one that we had before. I was really concerned about the quality of data that the state was getting and the quality of the data that we were giving the state, and the kind of the lack of available information that we were asked to provide. I actually think kind of focusing the report on appropriate policies and tracking implementation of those policies is a very useful process for the state, but it also just kind of elaborate and echo the point that was made just previously. It's also really helpful. It's helpful to kind of get community buy-in, right? Because I like the menu items, and it's really helped kind of clarify what we needed to do.
Okay, awesome. Brandon?
So I also think the idea of having the menu items is a positive. There is a relatively wide range of them. I do think that there should be, the ability for cities to get credit for things that aren't quite on the list, because that stifles innovation when it's, I've heard people say that I would rather, and I'm not expressing this as my point of view or anyone that I work for or anything, but there are people that have said, I'd rather just have the state take over, this than have the way MIHP is set up, because we're boxed into these, categories, and then you're fined. And I think there's a fundamental problem with it, to be honest. That fundamental problem is it's do this or else. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, it casts this shame, this pall of shame over all the cities, and they're trying to figure out, it puts them in panic mode, and they're sitting there thinking, how do we keep up with this? And if we don't get it right, and there's not public support, but the staff's working on it, and they don't quite make enough progress, then we're going to get this $90,000 fine, and then it's going to be $180,000. And the whole thing just sets it up so that it kind of paralyzes cities. I think we need to move to a different model that says that is more based on active incentive and more of a looking at it like, hey, you know, if you're making an issue sort of shame, then it becomes not an issue of compassion and also of missed opportunity for the cities and counties themselves of, you know, like, we have an opportunity to make a contribution here and to be our best selves and to make sure that everyone's housed. But when you bring in the fines and things like that, it changes the conversation fundamentally to do this or else. And that's, to me, the fundamental issue with it. And it's set that, you know, housing is a humanitarian issue. This is like an existential crisis, and we need to have the right paradigm set. And I think that that fundamental flaw of MIHP is that it sets the wrong paradigm. It almost demonizes the people who are being tasked with doing it at the city and county level.
Yeah, excellent points. And I do want to build off of one of those, which is kind of on incentives, because 2 or 3 years ago we built in the mechanic that said if you go above and beyond, you get prioritized in the Transportation Investment Fund matrix. But I've not heard anybody ever really say that, you know, being prioritized in a complicated formula for funds that are 10 years down the road is a meaningful incentive. Like, it's not direct, it's complicated and difficult to see the outcome. And most cities, I think, frankly, who went above and beyond did so just because they wanted to, or they felt compelled to. So I'd be curious to just know, too, and I see somebody who has a mic, so you can think about this question for a minute, but what kind of incentives would be meaningful to you and your elected officials, either to help implement some of these policies or to maybe reduce public frustration? What kind of incentives are there that get people to the table effectively? So you can think on that for a minute, but we've got a hand.
So, well, I have to give a shout out to Alyssa. She held my hand through a lot of it too, and she knows how frustrated I get with this report. Sometimes I envy the bigger cities. I'm sure it's a lot of work for them, but some of the choices are difficult for smaller cities because we just don't have the opportunity, honestly. But I do think that the report has served some good, probably a lot of good, but I do think the state has started to change their minds a little bit in seeing that it's not just the cities, that the development community plays a bigger role into it than they were trying to look like they did at the beginning.
Yeah.
I think they understand now that we can put all kinds of products out there, but if the developers don't pick them up off the table, we're stuck.
Yeah.
So I think the report has done some really good things. As far as the incentives go, I actually think that both the financial and the development community have as bigger roles to play in this as the cities do. So if there was a way that their incentives maybe didn't go through the city, but there was a way that they could feel like they were going to benefit more.
Sure.
Because when they come to us, they just don't see any benefit to any of it for us because the market rate is so much better.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I think that it has made some difference, though, in the perception of the legislature.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
Sorry, just one quick thought on this process. I mean, we've all had some headaches with it, but one thing I think was helpful was it gave some political cover to our local officials to basically just make the state the bad guy. And so when they needed to make hard decisions, they could say, look, the state's requiring us to do this. We don't really have a choice in the matter. And it helped them actually move forward and make good decisions on a broad scale that otherwise could be mired down with local political, pressures. So in that regard, I think it was helpful. One of the biggest frustrations I've had is just the data collection side of things, where I didn't see how our local data could be parsed together with everybody else's data on an aggregate level and be used for a large-scale analytic exercise. And so that was frustrating. It felt like, there was kind of busy work that wasn't really going to do a lot of good. I mean, it could if we were given very specific, expectations and enough time to so that everybody collected the same data, that it was all formatted in the same, manner, so it could be used on a large scale. But I really don't know that that can be done unless the state is the one who takes that initiative.
We're trying. Yeah. We've got the Zoom people. That's the trick.
With everyone else, I think we can just give Alyssa another shout out because I did this. So I started as a city planner in March. So one of the first big tasks I got put on was making a moderate income housing report. And coming from the engineering world, I didn't even know what it was. So I'm not sure how many hands Alyssa does have, but it feels like she's been holding a lot of them. My only struggle as we got into this and I understood more what the scope that the state was trying to do is the menu is great, but I felt like at least half of them weren't applicable to towns of smaller sizes.
Sure.
Tree Mountain's a fourth-class city, first-class citizens though, and so it was hard as we were going through that of either saying like we don't have the manpower internally from an administrative side. And so when we're trying to get some of the check mark box ones done of like waive impact fees for ADUs, we can't provide progress on there. It's not like we'll refund impact fees for ADUs is the next step.
Yeah.
So that was the hard part is we got through the list. It got really small really quick on what we felt we could accomplish. So as we move forward in the next phase, I would just like to see a menu that maybe starts polarizing if you're in a bigger or a higher class town municipality versus the lower class ones and maybe altering those expectations for manpower.
Yeah, excellent point.
I guess I have an underlying question. The state of Utah and all of us are trying to produce more affordable housing, right? So that our kids, our grandchildren, or all of us who sit here can actually live in a decent place. Now, a couple of years ago, the Utah League of Cities and Towns took account of entitled units. I don't know if that has been updated, but it seems there were maybe enough to approach the deficit by half or so. I don't know, you may have the better numbers there.
193,000, yep.
Okay, so in theory, plenty. I know I work in Midvale that we've had comments from developers about why they're not building all the units they could build in Midvale, and the comments were, well, we also are in other markets where our profit is a lot higher. So I guess my underlying question is, we may be able to do lots of things with a moderate income housing plan requirements, but the bigger issue maybe is, do we actually have an industry that can deliver, that has enough capacity to actually build these units?
Yeah. I think that is the core question, right? Is cities plan for housing, but we don't build housing. So how do we make sure and really what moderate income housing plans are asking you to do is to do what you can. And so that's led to a lot of frustration where state policymakers are like, well, we keep requiring cities to do things and cities are doing things, but there's not, like, our housing production isn't increasing. And I was at a real estate analytics conference a couple years ago, and they were talking, they had an economist saying that this was right before interest rates climbed, so it was like right at that peak. And his analogy was for builders, pulling an application at that time was like throwing a knife in the ceiling and waiting for it to drop, right? Like you don't know. The risk is financial risk is so high right now, and it's still really there for builders that the only things they can really make pencil usually are are high-end products that they can sell at a higher yield, or that they can have a little bit more price flexibility on. So the market's trying to work through that right now, but that also means that it feels like we're not making a lot of progress, right? We're not producing as many housing units, we're about half of what we were back in 2019 through 2021. So that's a real challenge. So I think that's a great point, though. How do we show that we're doing our part to the state? I think state leaders are more receptive than they were in past years to the fact that local governments can put all the pieces together, but nothing happens. I think what we still need to be able to show, whether it's through an MIHP report or wherever we go next, is we need to be able to show that we're doing our part. We don't know what that looks like exactly. That varies by community, but it's really critical to say that cities are taking this seriously, that we're planning as well as we can, but the projects just aren't penciling right now. And things are only going to get more tumultuous probably. The Fed has indicated that they might be lowering rates in the next couple of quarters, but at the same time, we're starting to see more existing inventory on the market. We're starting to see, which that's good news for housing supply more broadly. That's not great news if you're a builder, because that means you're competing with existing product. So yeah, we're still going to see a lot of market challenges, but the key is, how do we show that we're doing what we can? How do we show that cities are doing, like what Midvale can do might be different than a small rural community. So how do we account for that? Yeah.
And maybe I have kind of 3 points I could reiterate some of the ones that have been given. I'm Todd with Draper City. I think one of the positives is it did get our council talking about this. But what I found is that the council, it gives them the cover, but they are very adverse to buy into one of those menu items that they don't know if they're going to be able to accomplish it, because it may take a few years. There's a budgetary component. And so recently we had one that we had to pull out. We thought we were going to do the get rid of the impact fees. Well, when they realized they had to find a funding source to replace them, wasn't in the budget. We need to pull that one out. We put a few more options forward for things they might want to put in. They picked one, we put it in. Then at a council meeting, completely unknown to planning, they went out, found the funds, and dropped a different one that they went and did that wasn't in our plan. And so back to, if we could get a little more credit for those items. I mean, they went out and did workforce and employee housing, partnering with Ivory, another nonprofit. We didn't know until the day of the council meeting that was happening. And they're like, we did it. And we're like, but it doesn't count. So to answer your other question as well, I think if the incentives could be tied to funding or funding sources that tied directly back to the housing and implementation of some of those plans, I think that would be a much better incentive.
Yeah, so and I think that's a great point. It almost creates a perverse incentive to not try to do big things if you're not sure you'll be able to deliver it at the end of the day, which is, that's a high risk to take. And if you do something, like, you can either do something that's safe and easy, or you could try to do something that's bigger. And again, credit to Alyssa for helping a lot of communities work through those last minute changes. Because we want to make sure that we're accounting for the big things, not just the little predictable things. All right, let's see, we've got 20-ish minutes left. Yeah, Wilf.
On the housing plan input, Alexa, of course, talked about what the league is doing. With this being the APA conference, the planners conference, we just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that APA is going to be kicking off a process here to provide input. It's going to have to be relatively quick because they want the input by June 16th, I believe. But Zach Smallwood, who is here, who's our legislative co-chair, he's kind of heading up this process. So if I can give him just a minute, maybe just to say what's going to happen.
Yeah, so thanks everyone. Yeah, I'm Zach with Murray City. I'll be in the next panel, so you guys are going to hear this yet again. Yeah, I'll be leading up a work group similar to what was shown on the screen, kind of 5 different work groups. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, reach out to me directly, either after this panel, or if you're in the next panel, I have a QR code with my email and my phone number. I'll be moving pretty quickly through it so that we can get comments. One of the things that I wanted to make as a differentiation between the league and APA is that, you know, as APA, we'd like you guys to comment not as from your city per se, but as the profession, right? And as you personally, where, you know, responding with the league, you're more representing the city you work for or your community that you're working for. And I think this gives us a unique and a different opportunity through APA to kind of do it from a profession standpoint. So I'll turn it back over to them as well.
Yeah, thanks, Zach, and thanks for your willingness to step into the bonfire here. It's a lot, but it's also really critical work, right? So yeah, we appreciate that.
I have a question and then a comment, and I think Alyssa might be the only person that knows the answer to this question. Has anyone actually appealed? Have they gotten someone like not gotten their approval and then actually appealed? Okay, that's really fascinating because we've been doing this for 4 or 5 years. I think that's a really important data point. I'm going to tell you that I still think it needs to be overhauled, but I will also say that if the structure stays in place in some way, which I don't think that it should, but as it's currently constituted, like that tells you a lot about the appeal process. And I pointed this out a couple years ago. The appeal process is punitive because if you appeal, you lose the right to cure your existing plan. No one's going to appeal under that because you're making a $90,000 bet on that decision. And
yeah.
So that if it stays in place, I think it needs to be overhauled. But if it stays in place, that needs to be adjusted because it establishes this relationship between the state and the cities that's like, like if you dare have a different opinion, then you're going to get a fine. So,
yeah. Well, and the bright side is we've had, again, largely thanks to the team at DWS, including Alyssa, we've really had pretty remarkable compliance. It's been a lot of work to get there, but I think by and large cities have been able to comply with the requirements, and cities have also stepped up, and many of you have stepped up to make things work kind of sometimes at the last minute. But I think, again, it's shown that people are willing to work and try to be productive here. Yeah. Sorry, Meg, I'm making you walk all over the room.
Kind of some of the things that I've noticed with the moderate income housing plan, I was hopeful that it would, motivate, say, our planning commissions and councils, folks of that nature to be more excited about these opportunities and about the idea of taking on kind of larger structural changes, things of that nature. And where more comes into play, at least as far as I see it, is we're going through an approval process and we think we have a good project and it's running up against some opposition, and we'll say, well, this would be a great thing to help us check off boxes for our moderate income housing plan. And that carries the weight that it carries, which, it's and maybe in some cities it's more and maybe in some cities it's much less. But I always kind of felt that a lot of the education and strategy and kind of outreach that could be done around the moderate income housing plans really could be directed towards those audiences, towards planning commissions, towards councils. When a lot of that pressure comes and sits on the planning department, it's kind of preaching to the choir. We're already trying to accomplish these things. We need the support from other parties in order to see it manifest.
Yeah. Well, and I want to take that a step further, and I think a lot of times, you start to see. I think public opposition becomes a big issue talking about bigger housing projects, and I'm probably going to get a lot of eye rolls when I ask this, but are there any incentives in moderate income housing plans that you think could help get the public on board? And obviously, everybody's supportive of affordable housing until there's a project that's 3 stories tall behind them. But I'd love to hear if there's things that I think. this is me just getting on a soapbox here, but I think it's important that we're also able to engage with the public, because I think just ignoring public concerns doesn't get us very far. So is there anything in housing planning that you think could help us get more engagement with people who are either supportive of a project but not willing to stand up and say, I like this, or might help persuade some people who are concerned? Obviously, there's going to be the people who are always concerned and opposed to everything, but can we make the MIHP broader and make this interface apply more to the public too? Yeah. Meg, if you want, I can just repeat questions too.
The big issue is they see the final product.
They see the rezone, right?
Yeah, well, so for example, we came up with a zone and we had a lot of smaller lots, hoping that would, but then, so that's what the argument we give them, and then the developer comes in and builds a $700,000 house that goes up. And so people who know me know that I'm more than happy to blame the developers on this, but it really is. The end product is what they see, and they don't see that it's helping affordability at all. So they're like, well, why are you doing this? And we have a really hard time saying, well, we tried, you know, and that's the biggest problem, is they don't see the end result.
Yeah, and that's a great point. We did a public opinion survey back in 2018, 2019, and one of the highlights of that survey was that one of the main reasons that people end up opposing projects is a sense of broken trust, whether it's from the city, from the developer, from the state, whoever, but they feel like the thing that they were maybe promised or aspired to in the earlier planning phases or where they engaged prior is not what they're seeing at the end. Whether that's, you know, the city or the original project was small homes on small lots for first-time home buyers, and then ended up being $900,000 townhomes. You know, I think that's a very different perspective for residents. So yeah, I think that's a great point about trying to make sure the deliverable is what the public is promised.
Great. Well, thanks for bearing with us, those that don't report, but it's a good topic that may be coming your way soon. Who knows?
Yep. And again, please participate in our work group, participate with Zach, come to LPC. We want to hear your voice. We will keep trying to engage with everybody as these conversations move forward, because we really want to get something that works better. We don't want to have something worse than we have now. So that's what we'll be working towards, but stay tuned. We'll have just a couple more, really just like one slide, and then we'll jump into a couple just general Slido questions. Land Use Task Force. How many of you are familiar with Land Use Task Force? Awesome. So for those of you who didn't raise hands, the Land Use Task Force is a combination of local governments, cities, counties, developers, home builders, basically a group trying to sit together and hash out through technical land use policies. The Land Use Task Force is the group who, well, the Land Use Task Force is responsible for House Bill 368. They do a big housing technical land use bill every year, and then they do a couple other odds and ends issues. But the group hasn't met yet. They'll meet in 2 weeks, and we've heard there's already a lot of major changes potentially on the table. Obviously, we'll do our best to represent local governments, but that's what we're hearing is there's an ambitious agenda already. I don't know what those items are exactly, but that's what we're hearing from the private sector. So we'll have a better update for you later on, or if you listen to our policy committee, we'll be able to speak in more detail. But right now, it's still very much undetermined, but if you're hoping for a quiet land use year so you have time to implement House Bill 368 or any of the other big land use bills, 40 land use bills, it's not looking positive. In fact, I'd say that the interest in major land use changes at the state is increasing rather than slowing down. So we'll continue to advocate for giving people time to implement, but there's been not been a lot of appetite for that so far. So I'm going to switch over to, we'd like to get a couple of additional feedback points via Slido. For those of you who are in the first session and already had a chance to weigh in, you're welcome to stick around for this and provide more feedback, or you are welcome to just ignore it. But we wanted to give this group, this workshop, kind of a similar chance as the first workshop. Like I mentioned, we're kind of putting everything on the table for Land Use Task Force right now. We're setting the agenda. So we want to know what things that you would like to see changed in land use code. Again, kind of looking at technical issues right now, but we'd love to hear it. That doesn't mean we'll be able to get it to the end of the road in a bill, but we want to make sure that we are collecting feedback from you. And I'll just give a couple minutes. If anybody has questions, by the way, while we're filling these out, you're welcome to. I'm also happy to just stand here and make small talk. Oh, I don't do either of those things well. Nobody wants that. Yeah.
My sense is in Wasatch County, I don't know if this is going on statewide, but we've got a lot of developments approved and a lot less actual development of those. The ones that have the infrastructure in are getting building permits, but the projects that are approved are generally not moving forward very fast right now. And it's concerning to me to see us doing all these major revisions to the rules when we've got all these entitled, lots that could have building permits, because I think that it's, taking away potentially our ability to guide growth in a way that does what we need to do to protect the health, safety, welfare. I was wondering if some data gathered along those lines of we've got all these entitled lots and a lot of building isn't going on would help slow down these changes that people are so excited to make, the legislature is so excited to make, so that we can see what effect it's actually having before we approve a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't appear to be working, at least with the economy as it is right now.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. Again, we did a survey, started doing this 2 years ago, and found more than 193,000 entitled units across 70-something cities. So we know there's a lot more out there, and yeah, we hear that same kind of concern all the time. I was talking to a city manager at our conference who said, like, we've got all these entitlements kind of in this part of our city, but the developer wants to go over here where there's kind of higher end units on the edge of town. They think they can sell those for more, but those need a lot more infrastructure that's not there. We had planned for the infrastructure in these closer units, so we'd already started that, but we have to figure out how to jump over here instead. So that is an excellent point, and I think that's the case in much of the state right now. And I'd say bringing those points to the legislature has helped. If you look at the legislative audit on housing, which has been the genesis of the state housing plan, and on a couple pieces of legislation last session, they actually looked at that number. They went through and vetted our number and agreed with it. So you can go through and see where those entitlements are. However, I think state policymakers and even local policymakers to an extent are concerned. State policymakers have not really been willing to wade into the market heavily. So they've been reluctant to do that, but they are still very alarmed about the housing shortage, as we should all be. And so it's really hard to tell an elected official, like, there's a crisis, but just give it time and the market will work itself out. That's not been successful so far. So we've been pitching really hard for infrastructure funding, because we know that infrastructure is the number one reason most of those aren't being built. It's a terrible time to borrow, whether you're a local government, whether you're a developer. It's a really bad time to borrow for the cost that it takes to install new water pipes. Cities have allowed a lot more density in recent years in existing areas, which has been helpful, but at the same time has strained existing infrastructure systems, whether it's water treatment plants, sewer treatment plants. But that's infrastructure, in my mind, is the critical piece that we haven't been able to really solve. We've created all these infrastructure financing tools like the HDRZ, the HOPS, the FIZ, to try to help use tax increment to ease that. But tax increment for residential is tricky and doesn't always produce enough money. So yeah, basically, the state's also been not super keen on investing heavily to subsidize private development for infrastructure. So that's sort of the sticking point we've got, where and it has thwarted some other more hostile legislation, but at the same time, they still want to see something happen. Yeah. So next question, what sort of planning technical assistance does your city or town or county need? We've had a lot of conversations recently about technical assistance. We've done the local administrative advisor program, which specifically does not help planning or is required to not assist planning. It's for other administrative issues, but that's been really successful for a lot of small communities. But we know that it is a Herculean task every year to go through and try to update your codes. And by the time you update them, then usually the next session's around and you have to update them again. So we've heard a lot of supportive things from state policymakers who want to help local governments implement stuff rather than just pass new stuff. The funding is still not, well, the funding is anything but certain, but we'd like to know, I think through the state housing plan we have an opportunity to try to pursue more technical assistance, but it'd be great to hear from you what kind of model works, what areas specifically do you need assistance? Is it funding general plans? Is it funding studies? Is it funding capital improvement plans? Is it just somebody who can go around and help you? What kind of technical assistance would be beneficial to you? And on either of these questions, if you think of something later when you get home, feel free to email me and I'd be happy to incorporate it into this feedback. I guess we only have 3 minutes left, so I'm a little bit over time.
Yeah, and we'll wrap that up. Again, we're here for questions. We also on our website under advocacy events is all our spring training webinars. Wilf now will get to go over everything again, so head on in there. But whatever we can do to help you navigate this, please reach out to us on HB 368. If there are remaining questions, Jared Tingy of our staff would be more than happy to talk to you about that. So.
Yep. And I just have one more quick question. Sorry, this was a bonus one that I don't know if Meg knew about. We're also just looking for examples of cool housing and mixed use projects. Again, you can feel free to fill this out as you're leaving. But I just want to, again, really thank you all for being here. Now, some of you have already sat for 2 hours listening to us, and that's much too much. But really appreciate you being here. Really appreciate all you do for your cities, counties, and the state. Thank you all, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.